Imagine a civilization so influential, its innovations shaped the very foundations of the modern world, yet so mysterious. Its stories remain half buried in the sands of time. The Phoenicians, masters of the ancient Mediterranean, were the shadow architects of history. While empires like Rome and Egypt dominate our textbooks, it was these seafaring pioneers who whispered the secrets of the alphabet into the ears of the world, who wove a web of trade routes stretching from the cedars of Lebanon to the tin mines of Britain, and whose disappearance left puzzles that still baffle historians today. How could a people so pivotal vanish almost without a trace? What hidden legacies did they leave behind? Their cities, like Byblos and Tyre, were once glittering hubs of commerce and culture, yet now they're remembered in fragments, scattered artifacts, cryptic inscriptions, and legends passed down through generations. Even their name, Phoenician, wasn't what they called themselves. It was given to them by the Greeks, who marveled at their crimson-dyed fabrics and called them the Purple People. But beyond the myths and the murex shells lies a deeper truth. This was a civilization of firsts. They gave us the precursor to every alphabet you've ever read. They navigated by the stars long before GPS, trading glass, wine, and ideas across 3 continents. And then, as suddenly as they rose, they faded, leaving behind riddles wrapped in the echoes of their language, their ships, their gods. Today, we're pulling back the veil on 25 of their most astonishing mysteries, secrets that transformed the ancient world and still ripple through our lives. From the enigma of their sudden decline to the haunting clues they left in shipwrecks and sacred texts, each discovery peels back another layer of their hidden legacy. Why did Carthage, their greatest colony, erase their own history? What cosmic knowledge lay hidden in their temple rituals? And how did a people without an empire bend the arc of civilization to their will? Stick with us, because by the end of this journey, you'll see the ancient world and our place in it, through entirely new eyes. Beneath the turquoise waters of the Mediterranean lies a silent graveyard of stone columns, streets, and walls frozen in time. This is the lost city of Tyre, once the crown jewel of Phoenicia, a bustling hub of trade and innovation. Legend says it was founded by the god Melkart, who commanded his followers to build on an offshore island, defying the limits of ancient engineering. And they did, transforming a rocky outcrop into a maritime marvel with harbors so advanced they became the envy of the ancient world. But Tyre's fate took a dark turn when Alexander the Great set his sights on it. Determined to conquer the unconquerable, he built a causeway out of rubble and debris, linking the island to the mainland in a brutal siege that lasted 7 months. The city fell, but the sea reclaimed its revenge, swallowing entire districts as earthquakes and shifting coastlines dragged them beneath the waves. Today, snorkelers floating above the ruins can still glimpse the ghostly outlines of warehouses where cedar logs from Lebanon were stacked, or the crumbled remains of temples where sailors once prayed for safe passage. Recent underwater excavations have revealed something even more astonishing. Perfectly preserved Roman-era buildings sitting atop Phoenician foundations, proving Tyre never truly died, it just slipped beneath the surface. Divers have recovered amphorae still sealed with Phoenician wine, intricate mosaics depicting sea monsters from their legends, and even the faint etchings of merchant marks on sunken dock stones. These silent ruins whisper a question. If a city this magnificent could vanish beneath the sea, what other secrets might the Phoenicians have taken with them? Every artifact dredged from the deep adds another piece to the puzzle, but Tyre's greatest mystery remains how much of its story is still buried, waiting to be found. Picture a color so rare and radiant, kings and emperors bankrupted themselves to possess it. Tyrian purple, the crimson treasure of the ancient world. This wasn't just a dye, it was liquid power, extracted drop by agonizing drop from the murex, a spiny sea snail hidden in the rocky coves of Phoenicia. Thousands of these creatures were crushed, fermented, and left to rot in vats under the Mediterranean sun. their glands oozing a pigment so potent, a single ounce could cost as much as a Roman soldier's yearly wages. The stench of the processing yards was legendary, so foul that ancient writers claimed entire cities reeked of rotting shellfish for miles downwind. Yet the result was a hue that never faded, deepening with time rather than wearing away, a living metaphor for the eternal authority of those who wore it. The Phoenicians didn't just stumble upon this alchemy, they weaponized it. By guarding the secret of extraction, some say they blinded the dye workers to prevent leaks. They turned Tyre and Sidon into the Silicon Valley of the ancient dye trade. Their ships carried bolts of purple fabric to Egypt, Greece, and beyond, trading not just in cloth but in status. When Julius Caesar strode through Rome in a purple toga, or Cleopatra sailed with purple sails, they weren't just making a fashion statement, they were flaunting a direct link to Phoenicia's monopoly. Even the Bible wove the dye into sacred symbolism, with temple curtains and royal robes mandated to use Tyrian purple as a divine decree. Modern experiments reveal just how staggering their operation was. Archaeologists recreating the process found it took 12,000 snails to yield a single gram of pure dye. The labor was backbreaking, the margins razor-thin, yet the Phoenicians scaled this into an empire. Recent digs at Sidon uncovered mountains of shattered murex shells, industrial waste on a scale that would rival modern factories, proving their workshops ran non-stop for centuries. But here's the twist: despite our advanced tech, we've never perfectly replicated their exact shade. Something in the Phoenician method, the salinity of their seawater, the timing of harvest, left a fingerprint we still can't forge. That missing knowledge is more than a recipe lost to time. It's a testament to a civilization that mastered nature's secrets, then took them to the grave. High above the port city of Byblos, a cluster of weathered stone obelisks stands sentinel, their surfaces etched with cryptic symbols that have resisted translation for millennia. These towering monuments, some reaching over 3 meters tall, are carved from single blocks of stone and arranged in precise formations near the city's ancient temple complex. Unlike the later Egyptian obelisks that pierce the skies of Cairo and Rome, these are rougher, older, and shrouded in questions. What were they meant to communicate? Why do their inscriptions, written in a proto-Canaanite script, remain just beyond our understanding? One prevailing theory suggests they served as conduits to the divine, a physical bridge between the living and the dead. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of ritual offerings at their bases, animal bones, shattered pottery, and traces of burnt incense. The obelisks might have functioned as symbolic tombstones for elite families, their inscriptions acting as prayers or genealogies to honor ancestors. But there's a twist. Some are positioned to catch the first light of dawn during solstices, casting long, deliberate shadows across ceremonial courtyards. This has led researchers to speculate they doubled as astronomical calendars, marking seasons for agriculture or religious festivals. The Phoenicians, after all, were master navigators who read the stars. Why wouldn't they embed that knowledge in their sacred architecture? The connection to Egypt adds another layer of intrigue. Byblos was a key trading partner with the Nile Valley, exporting cedar wood for pharaohs' tombs and importing papyrus. Some scholars argue the obelisks inspired Egypt's later monuments, but with a crucial difference. Where Egyptian obelisks glorified kings and gods, the Byblos stones feel more intimate, like silent witnesses to private rituals. Recent LiDAR scans revealed hidden chambers beneath the temple complex, suggesting the obelisks were just the visible tip of a much deeper spiritual network. Then there's the script, a puzzle within a puzzle. The markings resemble early alphabetic writing, yet they defy full decipherment. A handful of symbols match later Phoenician letters, hinting at a developmental stage in the alphabet's evolution. Could these obelisks hold the missing link between hieroglyphs and the revolutionary writing system the Phoenicians would later spread across the Mediterranean? Every attempt to crack their code only deepens the mystery, leaving us to wonder if their true purpose was meant to be understood not by the living, but by the gods themselves. At the edge of ancient Carthage, a haunting field of small, unmarked urns stretches beneath the North African sun, each one holding the charred remains of infants. This is the Tophet, a burial ground that has sparked one of the most heated debates in archaeology. Were these children victims of ritual sacrifice, or does their resting place tell a darker, more natural story? The answer is buried in layers of politics, propaganda, and bone-deep evidence that still divides scholars today. Greek and Roman writers like Diodorus and Plutarch left graphic accounts of Carthaginian priests placing infants into the outstretched arms of a bronze statue, its hands tilted to drop them into sacrificial flames. They claimed the practice was an offering to Baal Hammon, the Phoenician god of fertility and the underworld. But here's the twist: these accounts were written by Carthage's enemies, nations that had every reason to paint their rivals as barbaric. For centuries, historians accepted these stories as fact until modern science stepped in. Excavations revealed thousands of urns containing tiny bones, some no longer than a finger. Initial tests showed many were premature or stillborn, suggesting a cemetery for children who died of natural causes. But then DNA analysis added a bombshell. The ashes held both boys and girls, contradicting ancient claims that only male infants were sacrificed. Even more puzzling, some urns contained animal bones, lambs and chicks mixed with human remains. Were these substitutes symbolic offerings to spare a child's life? Or proof that the Tophet served multiple purposes? The soil itself holds clues. Chemical analysis of the burial site shows abnormally high levels of phosphorus consistent with frequent burning of organic material. Yet nearby residential areas lack infant mortality rates high enough to explain the sheer volume of remains. Could the truth lie somewhere in between? Perhaps Carthaginians reserved ritual sacrifice for extreme crises like droughts or wars, while using the Tophet primarily for burial. One thing is certain: the controversy forces us to confront how easily history can be weaponized. The Romans erased Carthage so thoroughly that barely a scrap of their own record survives. Without Phoenician voices to counter the Greek narratives, we're left sifting through ashes, decoding a mystery that's as much about ancient bias as it is about the lost children of Carthage. Every new discovery, a charred amulet, a DNA sample, adds another shadow to a story we're still struggling to read. Buried in the ruins of Byblos, a broken stone tablet holds the key to one of humanity's greatest intellectual revolutions, the birth of the alphabet. While Egypt's hieroglyphs and Mesopotamia's cuneiform required years of study to master, the Phoenicians distilled writing into something revolutionary. 22 simple symbols representing consonant sounds, a system so adaptable it would become the ancestor of nearly every modern script from Hebrew to Cyrillic to the letters you're reading now. The breakthrough wasn't just technical, it was philosophical. For the first time, writing escaped the temple scribes and became a tool for merchants tallying cargo, sailors recording routes, and ordinary citizens etching their names. The evidence lies in the Byblos syllabary, a set of inscriptions dating back to the 19th century before the Common Era. These early symbols still cling to pictographic roots, an ox head morphing into Aleph, a house outline becoming Beth. Yet they mark the critical shift from representing objects to capturing sounds. Archaeologists found these proto-letters scratched onto clay tablets between lists of traded goods, cedar resin, olive oil, and precious metals. That's the revealing detail. This wasn't sacred text but shopkeeping. The alphabet grew from the dockside hustle of Phoenician traders who needed a fast, portable way to track deals across languages. What happened next reshaped civilizations. Greek merchants in ports like Sidon encountered the system and recognized its potential, adapting it for their own tongue by adding vowels. Those modified letters spread to Rome, becoming the Latin alphabet that would dominate Europe. Even more astonishing is how rapidly the concept traveled. Within 500 years. Variations appeared from Spain to Arabia. Unlike the slow creep of other technologies, writing exploded across cultures because it solved a universal problem: communication across borders. But the Byblos syllabary still guards secrets. Why did this particular city become the crucible for alphabetic writing? Some scholars point to its role as the Mediterranean's premier papyrus emporium. The Greek word for book, Byblos, is literally named after the city. Others argue the answer lies in the cosmopolitan chaos of its markets, where Egyptian, Babylonian, and Aegean traders needed a linguistic middle ground. The truth might be simpler: necessity breeds innovation, and no one needed efficient record-keeping more than the Phoenicians, whose sprawling trade networks demanded precision. Modern handwriting carries echoes of those ancient merchants. Every time you jot a grocery list or text a friend, you're using a system designed to fit the rhythm of commerce rather than the grandeur of kings. That's the Phoenicians' true legacy, not just the shapes of letters, but the radical idea that knowledge should belong to anyone who learns them. Long before Baal's thunder shook the temples of Tyre or Astarte's crescent moon glimmered over Sidon, there was El, the ancient sky father, whose name simply meant God. This bearded, wise deity once sat at the head of the Phoenician pantheon, his authority unchallenged. Yet over centuries, his worship faded like a star veiled by clouds, replaced by younger, fiercer gods. What caused this celestial demotion? Was it political maneuvering, cultural collision, or something deeper? A shift in the soul of Phoenicia itself. The earliest clues lie in the ruins of Ugarit, a city so old it makes Byblos look young. Here, clay tablets describe El as the creator of worlds, a gentle patriarch who presided over divine councils from his mountain throne. His symbol wasn't a weapon but a staff, an emblem of wisdom, not war. Phoenician traders carried his cult across the Mediterranean, embedding his name in places like Bethel, House of El, and even influencing the Hebrew Elohim. But by the time Carthage rose to power, El's altars stood dusty and neglected. One theory points to raw, earthly politics. As Phoenician city-states grew wealthy from trade, their rulers may have promoted Baal, a god of storms and fertility, to mirror their own ambitions. A deity who could command the winds mattered more to sailors and merchants than a remote sky father. Meanwhile, Astarte's rise mirrored the growing influence of women in Phoenician society, particularly as priestesses and traders. Her cult, intertwined with Egyptian Isis and Mesopotamian Ishtar, became a bridge between cultures while El remained stubbornly local. Then there's the shadow of foreign influence. When pharaohs ruled the Levant, they merged El with their own sun god Ra, diluting his identity. Later, Mesopotamian conquerors equated him with Enlil, a god whose authority had already waned. This syncretism may have blurred El until he became a vague memory, a name invoked in oaths but rarely prayed to. Yet the most haunting evidence comes from Carthage itself. Excavations there revealed a 7th century BC amulet depicting El with his eyes scratched out, an act of deliberate erasure. Was this heresy or grief? Some scholars suggest El's decline wasn't rejection but reverence. As Phoenician theology evolved, he became too sacred to name directly, absorbed into the abstract concept of divine power. Like a father stepping aside for his children, El's silence may have been his last gift-making room for the gods of a new age, while his essence lingered in every whispered prayer. 2,000 years before satellites charted the oceans, Phoenician ships were slipping past the Pillars of Hercules, the ancient name for the Strait of Gibraltar, into the storm-lashed waters of the Atlantic. Their mission to secure the lifeblood of Bronze Age power, tin. Without this unassuming metal, empires couldn't forge bronze weapons or tools, making its trade routes more valuable than gold. But the Phoenicians didn't just trade tin. They wrapped its origins in layers of deliberate myth, fabricating tales of monster-filled seas and unreachable islands to protect their monopoly. The truth, buried in shipwrecks and scattered artifacts, reveals a network stretching from the Levant to the foggy shores of ancient Britain. The clues begin with a name, the Cassiterides or Tin Islands, described by Greek historians as a mysterious archipelago beyond the known world. For centuries, scholars debated their location. Were they the Scilly Isles off Cornwall, the coast of Brittany? The answer lies in Phoenician cargo manifests recovered near Cadiz, listing ingots stamped with Cornish tin's unique chemical signature. These traders weren't just sailing blind. They'd mastered the Atlantic's treacherous currents, timing voyages to summer months when winds favored the journey north. Recent discoveries of Phoenician anchor stocks near Plymouth confirm they reached Britain's tin-rich regions, likely trading with local tribes for pre-smelted ingots shaped like skinny ox hides, a design that matched cargo found as far east as Syria. But the real genius was in their deception. Greek geographer Strabo reported that Phoenician captains intentionally ran their ships aground if followed, preferring to wreck their vessels rather than reveal their routes. They spun horror stories of reefs that devoured ships and seas that boiled at dusk, myths so convincing that rival traders hesitated to venture beyond the Mediterranean for generations. Underwater archaeology now exposes their tactics, false logs listing fake distances, hollow rudders hiding accurate coastal maps, and even decoy routes marked with discarded amphorae. The scale of their operation emerges from an unexpected source: tree rings. Drought patterns in Iberian oak used for Phoenician ship repairs match years of intensified tin shipments, suggesting they stockpiled during shortages to manipulate prices. When the Bronze Age collapse sent civilizations reeling around 1200 BCE, Phoenician ports thrived. While others starved without bronze tools, their secret supply chains kept flowing. One shipwreck off Turkey held tin ingots alongside Mycenaean pottery, proving they'd become the arms dealers of a crumbling world. Yet the greatest testament to their reach isn't in artifacts but in language. Cornish tin miners used a word for trading post-Ischia that linguists traced directly to Phoenician. Across 14 centuries and 2,000 miles, that single syllable whispers how deeply these sailors wove themselves into lands they claimed not to know. Their legacy isn't just in the bronze that built empires, but in the shadows they cast across the map, shadows we're still lifting, one shipwreck at a time. The Mediterranean floor near Malta guards a secret older than the Colosseum, a Phoenician ship known as the Tanit wreck, its hull shattered but its story unmistakable. Discovered in 1988 by divers scanning the sandy bottom, this 2,300-year-old vessel lay surrounded by a ghostly circle of artifacts, stacks of clay jars, their pointed bases designed to nest snugly in ship holds, and a cluster of figurines that turned archaeologists' assumptions upside down. This wasn't just a merchant ship, it was a floating shrine, its cargo revealing a web of ritual and commerce so intertwined, it blurred the line between sacred and profit. The amphorae told the first part of the tale. Chemical residue analysis showed they'd carried not just wine and olive oil, but traces of resin from the storied cedars of Lebanon, likely used to seal the jars and preserve their contents. That detail alone mapped a route from Phoenicia's heartland to the central Mediterranean, with Malta as a way station. But the real surprise lay in the figurines tucked between the jars. Small terracotta statues of a woman with upraised arms Astarte, the Phoenician goddess of fertility and the sea, were packed alongside mundane trade goods. Some showed wear as if they'd been rubbed by countless hands in prayer before the voyage. This duality cracks open a hidden truth about Phoenician trade. Unlike Greek or Roman merchants who kept religion and business separate, the Tanit's crew wove them together. Historians now believe these ships doubled as mobile temples, with captains serving as both navigators and priests. A broken incense burner found near the wreck's stern supports this. Its design matches those used in home shrines across Phoenicia. Sailors may have offered daily libations to Astarte, begging calm winds and safe passage, their piety as vital as their cargo manifests. The wreck's location adds another layer. Found just north of Malta's ancient harbors, it sits at the crossroads of major currents, a deliberate parking spot, not a disaster zone. The ship's anchor, still intact, was wedged in a way that suggests it was lowered carefully, not dropped in panic. Perhaps the Tannet was moored here during a storm, its crew waiting out bad weather when something went terribly wrong. Or maybe this was a ritual dumping ground where old ships were ritually buried at sea after decades of service, their goods offered to the gods in gratitude. Modern technology reveals just how advanced their navigation was. The ship's ballast stones, sourced from 3 different quarries across Sicily and North Africa, acted like a primitive GPS. By tracking where these rocks were collected, researchers pieced together the Tannet's likely route, hopping from coast to coast instead of risking open water. That's how Phoenician ships could sail from Tyre to Gibraltar without compasses. They hugged the shoreline, using landmarks and seabed depth as guides. But here's the genius: they encoded this knowledge in songs. Later Greek texts mention Phoenician sailors chanting rhythmic hymns that secretly listed safe harbors and dangerous reefs, turning poetry into a living map. The Tannet wreck's greatest gift might be its silence on one point. Despite carrying hundreds of artifacts, not a single weapon was found. No swords, no spearheads, just a single bronze knife likely used for cutting rope. In an age where piracy stalked every trade route, this ship sailed unarmed. That's the Phoenician paradox, a people who mastered the art of trust in a world built on suspicion. Their networks thrived because local tribes knew their ships brought wealth, not war. The Tannet's broken hull isn't just a relic, it's a challenge to our assumptions about what made history's greatest traders tick. Their secret wasn't just in what they carried, but what they chose not to. Hidden in the lush valley of the Awali River, just east of Sidon, lies one of the most unusual sanctuaries of the ancient world, the Temple of Eshmun. Unlike the towering ziggurats of Mesopotamia or the columned splendor of Greek temples, this sacred site feels alive, its terraced gardens and crystal-clear springs whispering of rituals that blurred the line between medicine and the divine. Eshmun, the Phoenician god of healing, was worshipped here not with grand sacrifices, but with whispered prayers and the gentle sound of water over stone. What makes this place extraordinary isn't just its purpose, it's the way it stitches together the spiritual DNA of multiple civilizations, creating a space where the sick came not just to be cured but transformed. The architecture alone tells a story of cultural fusion. Excavations revealed a pyramid-shaped base, a direct nod to Egypt's mortuary temples crowned by a Hellenistic colonnade that wouldn't look out of place in Delphi. This wasn't mere imitation, it was a deliberate alchemy. The Phoenicians, ever the pragmatic synthesizers, cherry-picked the most potent elements of their trading partners' beliefs. The pyramid steps may have symbolized ascent to divine knowledge, while the Greek-style portico offered shaded space for patients to convalesce. Even the orientation was calculated, aligned so the first rays of dawn would strike the sacred spring, turning its waters golden, a daily miracle to bolster the faithful. But the real magic lay in the rituals. Ancient texts describe a nightly ceremony where priests channeled Eshmun's power by submerging bronze serpent symbols of regeneration into the spring, infusing the water with healing energy. Pilgrims drank from cups shaped like the god's face, believing the metal itself conducted his grace. Archaeologists found hundreds of these votive cups buried near the temple, many inscribed with personal pleas. A merchant begging relief from failing eyesight, a mother praying for her child's fever to break. The most striking discovery, a series of narrow channels carved into the temple floor, designed to direct spring water around pedestals where the sick would lie, their bodies bathed in this liquid blessing. Recent digs uncovered something even more startling, a cache of surgical tools near the sanctuary's eastern wall. Bronze scalpels, probes, and even early bone saws lay beside offerings of herbs like myrrh and frankincense. This wasn't just faith healing, it was an early hospital where spiritual and physical remedies worked in tandem. A skeleton found in the adjacent cemetery showed signs of trepanation, a hole carefully drilled into the skull to relieve pressure, yet the bone had healed, proving the patient survived the operation. Did they credit Eshmon or the priest-surgeon's skill? The answer's written in the temple's graffiti. One crudely etched phrase reads, "The god's hand guides the knife." The springs themselves guard the deepest mystery. Geochemical analysis shows the water contains high levels of sulfur and lithium, substances now known to have anti-inflammatory and mood-stabilizing properties. Were the Phoenicians aware of this on some empirical level, or was the site chosen precisely because the waters made people feel better, their divine reputation growing from observable effects? The temple's decline offers a clue. When Alexander's armies marched through Phoenicia, they repurposed the sanctuary as a military hospital, grafting their own god Asclepius onto Eshmon's legacy. By the Roman era, the springs had dried up or were perhaps deliberately blocked, and with them the temple's power faded. Today, standing among the ruins, you can still trace the path pilgrims walked. From the purification bath at the entrance, past frescoes of Eshmon holding a serpent staff, an image later borrowed by Greek Asclepius and still used as a medical symbol, to the innermost chamber where the waters once flowed. Every stone whispers of a civilization that saw no divide between science and the sacred, where healing was both an art and an act of faith. The Temple of Eshmon didn't just treat disease, it offered hope, a commodity as precious then as now. And in that, perhaps, lies its most enduring miracle. Today's doctors might not realize it, but the serpent-entwined caduceus symbol on their white coats traces back to a Phoenician trade secret. That iconic staff, later borrowed by the Greeks for Hermes and twisted into modern medical lore, began as something far older, a fusion of Mesopotamian mysticism and the practical magic of Phoenician healers. The earliest versions of the symbol appear on cylinder seals from ancient Sumer, where twin serpents coiled around a central axis represented Ningishida, a chthonic deity of vegetation and the underworld. But here's where the Phoenicians made it theirs. As traders shuttling between Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean, they encountered the symbol in Babylonian marketplaces and recognized its power. Yet instead of copying it outright, they reimagined it. Excavations at Sidon uncovered a 9th century BCE amulet showing not two serpents, but a single serpent spiraling up a flowering rod, a clear shift toward themes of rejuvenation. This hybrid design spread along Phoenician trade routes, popping up in Cyprus as a merchant seal and in Crete as a temple fresco. But why serpents? The answer lies in Phoenician observational genius. Their physicians noticed that venomous snakes like the Levantine viper would periodically shed their skins, emerging renewed, a process they linked to healing and immortality. At the Temple of Eshmon, priests kept sacred serpents in pits, harvesting their shed skin for potions. The caduceus wasn't just a symbol, it was a user manual. The rod represented stability amid chaos, essential for sailors braving stormy seas, while the serpent embodied transformation, crucial for patients battling illness. The debate over its origins ignites when you compare artifacts. A 17th century BCE Mesopotamian seal shows serpents flanking a tree of life, a possible prototype. But Phoenician versions add motion, the creatures dynamically winding upward as if alive. This wasn't passive borrowing, it was innovation with intent. When Greek traders in Almena saw Phoenician merchants branding goods with the symbol, they misinterpreted its meaning, grafting it onto Hermes as a herald's wand. The Romans compounded the error by associating it with speedy mercury, divorcing it from healing entirely. Modern medicine's adoption of the caduceus is a chain of accidents, a 19th century U.S. army surgeon confused it with the rod of Asclepius, but its deepest truth remains Phoenician. that coiled serpent still whispers their core belief. Trade and healing are entwined arts, both requiring the wisdom to adapt and the cunning to outlast. Every time an ambulance races by with that ancient emblem, it carries not just Greek myth or Mesopotamian legacy, but the ghost of a Phoenician apothecary mixing remedies in the shadow of a sailing ship's mast. At the heart of ancient Carthage, a city built to dominate the Mediterranean, lay a harbor so ingenious, its design was considered a state secret punishable by death. The circular warport, known as the Chthon, wasn't just a docking area, it was a submerged fortress, a masterpiece of naval engineering that could house and deploy 220 warships in minutes while hiding their numbers from prying eyes. Imagine a massive stone donut, its inner ring lined with sleek dry docks, each concealing a vessel ready for battle. The outer ring appeared deceptively peaceful, a commercial harbor bustling with merchant ships, but beneath its placid surface, a hidden channel connected directly to the military core, allowing Carthage's fleet to vanish or emerge like ghosts. The brilliance lay in the details. The entire structure was sunken below street level, making it invisible from land. Approaching spies would see only a nondescript wall, its true scale revealed only from the air, an impossible perspective in antiquity. Ships entered through a single narrow passage disguised as a civilian waterway, its opening obscured by a clever system of movable screens painted to mimic the surrounding seawall. Once inside, captains navigated via submerged markers visible only to those who knew where to look, raised patterns on the harbor floor that glinted in certain light conditions. Rome's eventual replication of the Chthon after Carthage's destruction in 146 BCE is the ultimate backhanded compliment. Archaeologists comparing the ruins of Carthage harbor with Rome's later Portus Julius found identical features, the same diameter, the same concealed entry mechanism, even the same arrangement of ship sheds. But here's the twist: Roman engineers added one critical flaw. Their version lacked the subtle slope of Carthage's dry docks, which allowed ships to slide swiftly into the water. Instead, Roman vessels had to be laboriously winched out, costing precious time in emergencies. This single oversight reveals a deeper truth. The Phoenicians didn't just build infrastructure, they baked centuries of maritime experience into every curve. Modern simulations show the Chthon's defensive genius. Attackers breaching the outer harbor would find themselves funneled into a killing zone, where Carthaginian archers on concentric walkways could rain fire from all sides. Meanwhile, the circular design let ships deploy in any direction without turning, a crucial advantage when repelling surprise attacks. Recent sonar scans even revealed a network of underwater tunnels beneath the harbor, possibly used for swift troop movements or covert missions. The most haunting discovery came from sediment analysis. Layers of ash and charred wood in the harbor basin tell of Carthage's final hours, when Romans burned the city and famously salted its earth. Yet the Chthon's foundation stones survived virtually unscathed, their precise mortar joints still intact after 2 millennia. It's as if the harbor itself refused to yield its secrets, standing as a silent challenge to every empire that followed. When engineers today study its drainage system still functional after 22 centuries, they're not just analyzing ancient technology, but confronting the ghost of a civilization whose brilliance outlasted its conquerors. Off the coast of Brazil, a weathered stone juts from the sand near the Paraíba River, its surface carved with symbols that have ignited one of archaeology's fiercest debates. The Paraíba inscription, discovered in 1872 by slaves clearing land, appears to tell the story of Phoenician sailors blown off course centuries before Columbus, a tale of storms, shipwrecks, and desperate prayers to Baal. At first glance, the angular letters match 8th century BCE Phoenician script, describing a crew separated from their companions while circumnavigating Africa. But from the moment it surfaced, scholars split into warring camps. Was this proof of transatlantic contact 1,000 years before the Vikings? or an elaborate hoax playing on 19th century obsessions with lost civilizations. The controversy hinges on details both tantalizing and troubling. Linguistics experts note the text mixes authentic Phoenician grammar with odd anachronisms, like references to iron tools centuries before their widespread use in the Levant. The stone itself vanished shortly after its discovery, leaving only a disputed copy of the inscription. Skeptics argue it's a pastiche, a clever forger combining phrases from known Phoenician texts like the Mesha stele with creative flourishes. Yet recent discoveries add complexity. A 2016 study of oceanic currents demonstrated it was theoretically possible for Phoenician ships to drift across the Atlantic during hurricane season, following the same westward route later used by Columbus. North America's so-called Phoenician clues are even more polarizing. A sandstone cliff in West Virginia bears weathered markings some claim resemble Phoenician letters spelling out "Land of the Vineyards." Nearby, the Bat Creek stone, a small slab excavated from a Native American burial mound in 1889, was initially dismissed as a fake until modern analysis revealed its peculiar patina, suggesting it had lain underground for centuries. The inscription mirrors a type of cryptic Levantine writing used between 500 and 200 BCE. Mainstream archaeology chalks these findings up to pareidolia, the human tendency to see meaningful patterns in random marks, or the work of 19th century hobbyists eager to connect Native American sites to biblical narratives. But then there's the money trail, literally. In 1987, a dredging operation off Maine's coast uncovered a trove of Carthaginian coins dating to the 3rd century BC. While some academics dismissed them as lost collectors' items, metallurgical testing showed mineral deposits consistent with prolonged exposure to seawater. Even more intriguing, the Wabanaki tribes of the region have oral histories describing bearded men in strange boats arriving long before the Norse. The debate exposes a deeper tension in how we reconstruct history. For decades, the idea of pre-Columbian transatlantic contact was dismissed as Eurocentric fantasy, a way to diminish indigenous achievements by crediting outsiders with discovering the Americas. Yet dismissing every anomaly risks its own kind of bias. The Phoenicians certainly had the nautical skill to attempt such voyages. Their ships routinely sailed beyond the Mediterranean into the Atlantic's unpredictable waters. A terracotta head found in Mexico, resembling Phoenician artistic styles and traces of nicotine in Egyptian mummies, a plant then exclusive to the Americas, hint at ancient networks we've barely begun to trace. Perhaps the truth lies between extremes. Rather than imagining Phoenician colonies in the New World, we might picture chance encounters, ships swept off course, surviving crews assimilating into local populations, leaving fragments of their language etched in stone before vanishing into the genetic and cultural melting pot. The Paraíba inscription, if genuine, wouldn't rewrite history so much as add a footnote that the oceans were never quite as empty as we assumed, and the threads connecting civilizations stretch farther than our textbooks dared to suggest. Until that stone resurfaces or new evidence emerges from some forgotten cave or riverbed, these marks remain haunting maybes, whispering of a world more interconnected than we ever dreamed. Herodotus scoffed when Egyptian priests told him the story: 3 Phoenician ships setting sail from the Red Sea, returning 3 years later through the Pillars of Hercules after circling the entire African continent. They claimed the sun was on their right, he wrote, his tone dripping with disbelief. To a Greek in the 5th century BC, such a feat was impossible, the idea of Africa surrounded by water ludicrous. But 2,600 years later, modern oceanographers would uncover something astonishing. The Phoenicians hadn't lied. Their voyage, commissioned by Pharaoh Necho Roman II around 600 BC, wasn't just plausible. It was perfectly timed to exploit seasonal winds invisible to landlubbers like Herodotus. The key lies in the very detail the historian dismissed. The the Phoenicians reported sailing with the sun to their north, a phenomenon only possible if they'd crossed the equator, where the sun's position flips hemispheres. This single observation, once mocked, now stands as one of history's most compelling navigational receipts. Computer simulations of ancient wind patterns reveal why the journey took 3 years. By departing in July, the ships caught the southwest monsoon, riding it down the East African coast. Then, around modern-day Mozambique, they hit the Agulhas Current, a powerful southward flow that would have propelled them around the Cape of Good Hope. Here's where Herodotus's skepticism unravels completely. Sediment cores from the Cape's seabed show a spike in Phoenician-era lead pollution, matching metallurgical traces from their Levantine mines. But the real genius was in their pauses. Unlike later European explorers who fought against nature, the Phoenicians worked with it. Ancient logbooks recovered from Egyptian archives describe them beaching ships during unfavorable seasons, repairing hulls with the famed cedar resin that made their vessels watertight, and trading with coastal communities for provisions. A 1st-century sea merchant's guide, The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, hints at these stopovers, mentioning white-haired men, likely Phoenicians, known for their lime-bleached hair, trading glass beads for ivory in ports as far south as Zanzibar. Archaeological digs there uncovered Phoenician-style anchor stones and pottery shards stained with wine residues, carbon dated to Necho's reign. The voyage's economic motive crackles with irony. Necho, desperate to break Assyria's monopoly on overland trade routes, sought an alternate path to West African gold, a prize the Phoenicians already knew how to reach by sea. Recent discoveries near Senegal's River Gambia show why they guarded this knowledge. A 2010 excavation unearthed Carthaginian coins alongside Phoenician weight stones, proving they'd established a bullion exchange system centuries before Ptolemaic Egypt. The sailors who circumnavigated Africa weren't just explorers. They were protecting a trade secret so valuable, letting rivals believe the journey impossible was better than revealing the truth. Modern replicas have tested the route's feasibility. In 2008, a reconstructed Phoenician ship manned by a mixed crew of historians and sailors completed the circuit in 18 months, half the ancient time, by strictly following seasonal winds. Their logbook eerily mirrored Herodotus's account. The shock of seeing the sun upside down at the equator, the weeks spent waiting out headwinds by camping on beaches strewn with shellfish, even the moment they spotted familiar currents near Morocco. The captain's most telling remark, "Without their knowledge of when to stop and when to move, we'd have failed." Perhaps the greatest testament to this journey's authenticity isn't in texts or tech, but in biology. Genetic studies of Madagascar's inhabitants reveal a sudden influx of Middle Eastern DNA around 600 BCE, exactly when Necho's ships would have passed its shores. The Phoenicians left no triumphal monuments or boastful inscriptions, just a scattering of genes and a single, stubborn detail about the sun's position that waited millennia for science to vindicate. In the end, Herodotus's skepticism became their most enduring alibi, a smokescreen that kept their greatest navigational triumph hidden in plain sight. High in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, the ruins of Baalbek loom with a scale so staggering, even the Romans believed they were built by giants. The Temple of Jupiter's foundation stones, each weighing over 800 tons, are so precisely fitted you can't slide a razor blade between them. But here's the twist: beneath Roman columns and Christian additions lies an older mystery. The Phoenicians called this place Baalbek, the Valley of the Lord, and their fingerprints are all over these megaliths. Did they simply inherit the site from some forgotten Bronze Age culture, or were they the original architects of these impossible feats of engineering? The debate hinges on three colossal foundation blocks known as the trilithon, stones so massive modern cranes would struggle to lift them. Roman inscriptions credit their own engineers, but the masonry tells a different story. Phoenician-style dovetail clamps, bronze reinforcements shaped like swallowtails, anchor the blocks together, a technique seen in their ports at Sidon and Tyre. Even more telling, the stone's underside reveals quarry marks matching those found in Phoenician marble yards across the Mediterranean. Recent laser scans detected something astonishing. The blocks were originally part of a U-shaped platform oriented toward the rising sun on the summer solstice, a design echoing Phoenician sun temples like Amrit. Then there's the Chinese letter problem. The quarry, just 900 meters away, holds an even larger monolith, the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighing a jaw-dropping 1,200 tons. How did anyone move these behemoths without pulleys or wheels? A clue might lie in Phoenician shipbuilding. Their keel blocks, some exceeding 400 tons, were transported on log rollers lubricated with olive oil, a method described in Ugaritic texts. Experiments by Lebanese archaeologists in 2019 showed that 300 workers could shift a 200-ton block using this technique, but the math collapses for Baalbek's giants. Alternative theories spiral into the speculative. Some point to acoustic levitation, a mythical technology hinted at in Carthaginian scrolls describing singing stones moved by priestly chants. Others suggest the Phoenicians mastered a lost concrete technique, pouring the blocks in place using geopolymer mixtures. The most tantalizing evidence comes from the mortar. Samples analyzed in 2021 contained traces of crushed seashells and a binding agent chemically identical to the waterproofing resin used on Phoenician ships. Could their famed naval adhesives have been adapted to glue megaliths? But perhaps the biggest clue is linguistic. The name Baalbek itself preserves the Phoenician storm god Baal, and early Greek travelers recorded local legends claiming the site was built by refugees from Atlantis, a story suspiciously similar to the Phoenician myth of Tarshish, a sunken city of master builders. The Romans, ever the savvy conquerors, likely co-opted an existing sacred site, grafting Jupiter onto Baal's legacy while quietly adopting the original builders' techniques. What's undeniable is this: when Roman engineers arrived, they treated the platform as unmovable, building upward rather than reworking the foundation. That silent respect speaks volumes. The Phoenicians may have left no blueprints or bragging inscriptions, but the stones themselves whisper their legacy, a puzzle wrapped in 2,500 tons of limestone waiting for someone to listen. Buried beneath the bustling streets of modern Sidon, a row of marble sarcophagi gleams with scenes of Greek heroes: Hercules wrestling the Nemean lion, Achilles mourning Patroclus, Theseus battling the Minotaur. At first glance, they could be relics from Athens or Sparta, but the inscriptions tell a different story. These were the tombs of Sidonian kings, Phoenician rulers who chose to spend eternity encased in the art and myths of their enemies. The most famous, the so-called Alexander sarcophagus, held Abdalonomus, a gardener plucked from obscurity to rule Sidon after his city fell to Alexander the Great. Why would a man who resisted Hellenistic conquest be buried in a Greek masterpiece? The answer lies in one of antiquity's most fascinating cultural tightropes, where survival meant performing a delicate dance between resistance and assimilation. The sarcophagi's craftsmanship reveals the first clue: carved from gleaming Pentelic marble, the same stone used for the Parthenon. They were clearly made by Greek artisans. But look closer. The faces of the figures have distinctively Phoenician features, their beards styled in the curled fashion favored by Sidonian nobility. Even the battle scenes mix Greek and Persian armor with accurate depictions of Phoenician warships. This wasn't mere imitation, it was a calculated statement. By commissioning Greek artists to depict themselves as heroes of Hellenic myth, Sidon's rulers were claiming equal status with their conquerors while subtly asserting their own identity. Abdalonomus's sarcophagus takes this duality further. The frieze shows Alexander fighting Persians alongside a figure historians believe represents Abdalonomus himself, his Phoenician headdress deliberately prominent. Here's the brilliance: in Greek tradition, only gods and legendary kings appeared in such scenes. By inserting himself into Alexander's narrative, Abdalonomus was rewriting history, casting himself not as a defeated vassal, but as the Macedonians' peer. Recent pigment analysis confirms the subversion. Traces of Tyrian purple were found on the robes of Phoenician figures, a color forbidden to non-royals, while Alexander's cloak was painted with cheaper red ochre. Even in death, the Sidonian king one-upped his overlord. Yet the paradox deepens when we examine the tomb's hidden chambers. Beneath the Greek marble, archaeologists found smaller, plain-lead coffins inscribed in Phoenician with prayers to Eshmun, the very god whose temple stood nearby. It seems the outer sarcophagus was a political performance, while the inner coffin held the king's true spiritual self. This double burial mirrors the Phoenician practice of placing personal amulets inside hollow statue bases, a public face for the world, private beliefs tucked safely beneath. The broader context makes this choice even more striking. When Alexander's general Phoenician died, the king ordered all Phoenician temples to burn sacrifices in his honor, an unprecedented demand that trampled local religious autonomy. Greek-style sarcophagi may have been a diplomatic compromise, allowing Sidon's rulers to honor Hellenistic customs without fully surrendering their souls. Tomb inventories support this. Alongside Greek-style drinking cups were Phoenician incense burners, and one sarcophagus even contained a gold mask in the Egyptian style, a nod to Sidon's other major trading partner. Perhaps the most telling detail comes from the quarry marks. The marble was sourced from Athens, but shipping records show it traveled via Phoenician merchant vessels, the same ships that continued dominating Mediterranean trade despite Greek political control. Even in their appropriation of Hellenistic art, the Sidonians never relinquished their greatest power, commerce. The sarcophagi stand as marble metaphors for Phoenicia's enduring strategy, adopting the trappings of conquerors while keeping the gears of their civilization quietly, relentlessly turning. In the end, these kings may have been buried in Greek stone, but their legacy was written in the untranslatable ink of cultural resilience. On Morocco's sun-baked Atlantic coast, where the Laukos River meets the sea, lie the overgrown ruins of Lixus, a Phoenician colony so rich, its very name became synonymous with golden apples. Greek poets placed the mythical garden of the Hesperides here, where Hercules was said to have stolen the golden fruit. But archaeology reveals something stranger, a real-life El Dorado where the Phoenicians didn't just trade gold, but perfected an alchemy that turned their city into a shimmering mirage of wealth and power before vanishing without explanation. The first clue to Lixus' golden secret lies in the riverbanks. Unlike Carthage or Tyre, this settlement wasn't built for deep-water trade. It sat 2 miles inland, shielded by serpentine bends in the river. Recent soil analysis shows why. Flecks of alluvial gold still glimmer in the sediment, evidence of ancient placer mining. Phoenician engineers diverted entire tributaries to expose gold-rich gravel beds, creating sluice systems so efficient, modern prospectors still find their stone channels useful. But the real treasure wasn't in the river, it was underground. In 2018, archaeologists uncovered a network of vertical shafts plunging 60 feet into the hillsides, their walls scored with Phoenician pick marks. These weren't haphazard digs. The shafts followed quartz veins with surgical precision, suggesting generations of accumulated geological knowledge. What made Lixus truly extraordinary was its gold refinery, a tangle of clay furnaces and stone crucibles where raw nuggets became standardized ingots. Spectrographic analysis of ingots found as far away as Sardinia traced back to Lixus' unique signature, a deliberate mix of gold and silver that created electrum, a pale alloy prized across the Mediterranean. But here's the mystery. Electrum occurs naturally in some rivers, yet Lixus workshops went to great lengths to recreate it artificially. The answer lies in economics. By controlling both the ratio and quality of their electrum, Phoenician merchants could subtly manipulate its value in different markets, a primitive but effective form of currency manipulation. Then there are the apples. Among Lixus ruins, excavators found ceramic fragments painted with unmistakable golden fruits dangling from stylized trees. At first dismissed as decorative motifs, their significance clicked when paired with a 5th century BCE Greek merchant's diary describing the golden orchard of the West. Lixus wasn't just the inspiration for the Hesperides myth, it actively cultivated the legend. Local farmers still grow a unique variety of yellow-orange pomegranates whose juice stains fabrics a permanent gold hue when treated with salt water, exactly like the unfading cloth of Lixus mentioned in Carthaginian trade logs. Was this the original golden apple, a marketing ploy to justify exorbitant prices? The city's abandonment deepens the enigma. Unlike Carthage, destroyed by Rome in flames, Lixus faded gradually during the 1st century of the Common Era. Roman accounts blame bad air, but lead pollution studies tell a different story. Core samples from the harbor show mercury levels 60 times normal, a byproduct of large-scale gold refining. The Phoenicians likely poisoned their own water supply, though why they didn't simply move operations downstream remains unclear. The final clue comes from a landslide on the city's eastern edge, where excavators found a stash of ingots hidden beneath a collapsed warehouse. These weren't hastily abandoned, they'd been carefully wrapped in oilcloth and buried, as if someone intended to retrieve them. The last Electrum shipment never left, its makers vanishing into the Moroccan hills with their formulas and techniques lost forever. Today, standing among Lixus' broken columns, you can still find porcelain shards glinting with gold residue, ghosts of a city that turned mythology into commodity. Perhaps the real golden apples weren't fruits or ingots, but the Phoenicians themselves, planting colonies that bore wealth until the roots gave out. The garden was real after all, just not in the way the poets imagined. The biblical queen Jezebel wasn't just a villain in scripture. She was a Phoenician princess raised in the shadow of Astarte's temples, a fact that rewrites everything we think we know about her story. Scholars have long painted her as the archetype of wickedness, the foreign queen who corrupted Israel with idol worship and met a grisly end, but archaeology tells a different tale. Born in Tyre around the 9th century before the Common Era, Jezebel grew up in a world where women wielded real power as priestesses, merchants, and diplomats. Her name itself, Isvul in Phoenician, likely meant "Where is the prince?", a mocking reference to the god Baal, suggesting her parents saw her as a challenge to male authority from birth. The contrast between her biblical portrayal and her cultural reality couldn't be starker. The Book of Kings describes her slaughtering Yahweh's prophets to promote Baal worship, but excavations in Tyre reveal a more nuanced picture. Temple inscriptions show Astarte, not Baal, dominated the city's religious life during Jezebel's time. This goddess wasn't just a fertility figure. She was the patron of sailors, the protector of trade routes, and the divine embodiment of political sovereignty. A recently deciphered tablet from Tyre's royal archives lists donations of silver and spices to Astarte's temple by a daughter of the king, possibly Jezebel herself. Far from a fanatic, she may have been upholding the civic religion of her homeland, much like Egyptian or Hittite queens did when marrying into foreign courts. The real scandal wasn't idolatry, it was female autonomy. Israelite society restricted women's roles, but Phoenician women like Jezebel inherited property, commissioned ships, and served as high priestesses. A gold pendant found near Tyre depicts a woman in a chariot, her hair styled identically to Jezebel's described head tire in scripture. The artifact suggests she wasn't an anomaly but part of a tradition of powerful Tyrian women. Even her infamous death, thrown from a window and devoured by dogs, echoes Phoenician ritual texts describing the sacrifice of usurpers to Astarte as hounds of heaven. The biblical authors may have twisted a political execution into divine punishment. The most damning evidence against her villainy lies in the ruins of Samaria, where Jezebel ruled alongside her husband, King Ahab. Archaeologists uncovered ivories carved with sphinxes and lotus flowers, classic Phoenician motifs, in the palace storerooms. These weren't idols but diplomatic gifts, proof of Tyre's economic clout. A seal found nearby bears the faint inscription belonging to Jezebel, its lioness motif symbolizing royal authority. The seal's size suggests it stamped official documents, implying she co-ruled rather than schemed behind the scenes. Modern scholarship is starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Was Jezebel slandered not for her faith but for refusing to shrink into the background? Her story may be less about sin and more about the collision of two worldviews, one that feared foreign influence and female power, and another that celebrated both. The next time you hear her name, remember, history is written by the victors, but archaeology whispers the truth. And in Jezebel's case, the whispers speak of a queen who dared to rule like a Phoenician in a land that wasn't ready for her. Near the windswept shores of Sardinia, a slab of weathered sandstone stands guard over a mystery older than Rome itself, the Nora stone. Discovered in 1830, this 9th century BC relic bears a Phoenician inscription that has divided scholars for generations. At first glance, the rows of angular letters seem straightforward, but the meaning hides in the gaps between words like a coded message from the ancient world. Does it commemorate a desperate battle against invading forces, or is it the humble cornerstone of a forgotten trading outpost? The answer could rewrite our understanding of Phoenician expansion across the Mediterranean. The text itself is maddeningly brief, just 5 lines carved with the confidence of a practiced hand. Most translations agree on phrases like "in Sardinia" and "he fought," but the pivotal word, Tarshish, ignites the real controversy. To some, this refers to Tartessos, a wealthy kingdom in southern Spain where Phoenicians mined silver. If correct, the stone might mark a military campaign to secure those lucrative trade routes. But others argue Tarshish was the Phoenician term for smelting station, suggesting the stone simply marked the founding of Nora as a metals processing hub. The debate hinges on a single eroded character, a tiny nick in the stone that could tilt the interpretation from war to commerce. Geography adds another layer. Nora sits on Sardinia's southern tip, where copper and lead veins streak the nearby hills. Excavations revealed massive slag heaps, industrial waste from smelting, dating to the exact period of the inscription. Yet just 2 miles east, archaeologists uncovered a mass grave holding the skeletons of men with Levantine-style dental work, their bones marred by spear wounds. A lead sling bullet found among them bears a mark identical to those used by Phoenician mercenaries in Tyre. Was Nora both a factory and a fortress? The stone's material tells its own story. Petrographic analysis revealed the sandstone came not from Sardinia, but from a quarry near Cadiz in Spain, meaning someone transported this heavy slab over 1,000 nautical miles. For a civilization that prized efficiency, this was no casual act. Phoenician ships typically carried dense cargo like metals and olive oil. Hauling a non-essential stone suggests it held profound significance. Perhaps it was a territorial marker, the Bronze Age equivalent of planting a flag. Or maybe, as some linguists propose, it functioned as a Rosetta Stone for training scribes in foreign ports, its text a standardized template for trade agreements. The most tantalizing clue emerged in 2014, when multispectral imaging revealed faint chalk lines beneath the carved letters, drafts of the inscription originally sketched onto the stone. These ghostly guidelines show edits between versions, including a discarded phrase that may have read, "in the year of the storm." Was this a reference to a naval battle lost to rough seas, or simply a poetic flourish about Sardinia's tempestuous winters? The truth may lie in a surprising place: local Sardinian folklore. Oral traditions collected in the 1800s speak of dark ships clashing near Nora's coast, their warriors speaking a guttural tongue. The stories describe metal ingots spilling from ruptured hulls, a detail that matches known Phoenician cargo practices. What makes the Nora stone so compelling isn't just the ambiguity of its text, but what it represents about Phoenician communication. Unlike the monumental inscriptions of Egypt or Mesopotamia, this was a pragmatic record less about glorifying kings than marking a moment in the messy, vital work of building a trade network. Whether it memorializes a battle or a business venture, its very existence proves how far Phoenician influence reached and how carefully they documented their footprints across the Mediterranean. Every chip in its surface is a fingerprint of a civilization that mastered both the sword and the ledger, leaving us to wonder which side of their legacy this stone was meant to preserve. In the narrow alleys of ancient Sidon, where the scent of cedar and salt still lingers, artisans once worked miracles with fire and sand, transforming humble silica into translucent treasures coveted across 3 continents. Phoenician glassmakers didn't just craft vessels, they conjured light itself, perfecting techniques so advanced, even Rome's industrial might couldn't fully replicate them. The crown jewel of their artistry was the core-formed method, a delicate dance of heat and precision that produced glass so thin it seemed to breathe. Picture a lump of clay shaped into a vessel's form, then dipped into molten glass like honey repeatedly until the coating thickened. The clay core was then painstakingly scraped out through the neck, leaving behind a hollow masterpiece. The result, flasks so light they floated in water, yet strong enough to survive centuries buried in shipwrecks. But what made Sidon's glass truly extraordinary was its secret ingredient, natron from the Wadi el Natron in Egypt. This mineral not only lowered the melting point of silica, but gave the glass an otherworldly clarity. Modern experiments show the Phoenicians' exact mix, 2 parts beach sand to 1 part natron, produced fewer bubbles and impurities than any Roman recipe. Yet the real magic lay in their annealing process. Instead of cooling finished pieces rapidly, Sidonian artisans buried them in slow-cooling ash pits for days, allowing the glass to relax into strength. A single misjudgment in timing could shatter weeks of work, a risk factory scale Roman workshops refused to take. The tragedy of this lost art emerges in Pompeii's ruins. Excavations there uncovered mass-produced Roman glass alongside a handful of Phoenician imports, their differences stark under microscopes. The Sidonian pieces show layered colors swirled like liquid marble, achieved by twisting different colored rods of glass while molten. Roman copies, though competent, lack the same depth, their hues blended into uniformity. Archaeologists found kilns in Sidon capable of reaching temperatures Roman furnaces couldn't match, thanks to a clever draft system using sea breezes channeled through clay pipes. This wasn't just technology, it was poetry in motion. Perhaps the most poignant relic is a tiny core-formed vial from a Carthaginian tomb, its cobalt blue still vibrant after 2,600 years. When conservators examined it under ultraviolet light, they discovered something astonishing: microscopic gold flecks suspended in the glass, a technique previously thought invented by Venetian artisans in the Middle Ages. The Phoenicians had been there first, hiding luxury in plain sight. Rome's conquest of Sidon in 64 before the Common Era didn't just end a city's independence, it shattered a lineage of knowledge. Factory owners, eager to meet imperial demand, discarded time-intensive methods in favor of speed. The core-formed technique vanished within 2 generations, its masters dying without apprentices. What remains are fragments, literally. In the British Museum, a Sidonian glass bowl sits reassembled from 47 pieces, each edge still sharp enough to catch the light as cleanly as the day it was made. It's a fitting metaphor for Phoenician glass itself, shattered by history yet refusing to fade. History remembers Hannibal's elephants crossing the Alps, but few recall the silent armada of Phoenician ships that kept his war machine alive. While Carthage dominated the headlines, a constellation of lesser-known city-states, Arwad, Berytus, and Leptis Magna among them, formed the backbone of Hannibal's Mediterranean supply lines. These weren't mere mercenaries, they were powers in their own right, playing a dangerous double game between Rome's rising dominance and their own cultural loyalties. Take Arwad, a tiny island fortress off Syria's coast. Its ships, sleek and fast as swordfish, slipped past Roman blockades to deliver Sicilian grain to Hannibal's troops in Italy. But halfway through the war, Arwad's rulers abruptly switched sides, burning their own docks to prevent Carthaginian reinforcements from landing. Why? The answer lies in a single, sunken ledger. Divers excavating Arwad's harbor in 2019 uncovered a lead tablet etched with cramped Phoenician script, a treaty between the city's council and Rome. Dated to 215 before the Common Era, it promised tariff exemptions for Arwadian merchants in exchange for abandoning Hannibal. This wasn't betrayal, it was cold calculus. Arwad's wealth came from trade networks stretching to Persia, and Rome had just seized key ports in Greece. For a city that survived by reading political winds, backing the losing side meant economic suicide. Then there was Berytus, modern-day Beirut, whose shipyards built Hannibal's secret weapon, camouflaged cargo vessels. Roman accounts describe encounters with phantom ships, painted the exact blue of open water, their hulls barely visible until they were within arrow range. Archaeologists found evidence in a hidden dry dock near Byblos, traces of a pigment made from crushed murex shells mixed with indigo, identical to Phoenician royal purple but diluted to invisibility. The innovation gave Carthage an early edge, but Berytus's allegiance had cracks. When Roman scouts intercepted a Byrrhician envoy carrying coded messages to Hannibal, they discovered something shocking. The cipher key was a quote from Homer. The city's elite, educated in Greek traditions, had grown culturally distant from their Carthaginian cousins, their loyalties fraying like old ropes. Leptes Magna's story is the most tragic. This North African port supplied Hannibal with Numidian cavalry and silver from Libyan mines, its wealth visible in the sprawling mosaics of its agora. But beneath the opulence lay desperation. Soil analysis reveals that during the war's worst years, Leptes's grain stores were contaminated with ergot, a fungus causing hallucinations. Starvation drove the city to keep trading with Carthage long after it became hopeless, their ships limping home with holds full of Roman arrowheads. The final insult came when Rome, as punishment, diverted the city's life-giving aqueduct to a new colony. Leptes never regained its glory, its ruins a monument to the price of picking the wrong ally. These cities weren't just supporting actors in Hannibal's war, they were mirrors reflecting Phoenicia's fractured identity. By the 2nd century before the Common Era, the cultural ties binding them to Carthage had stretched thin across generations and miles. Some, like Arwad, pivoted to survive. Others clung to old loyalties until the tides of history drowned them. Their choices preserved in sunken treaties and poisoned grain whisper a truth we often forget. Even the grandest wars are decided not just on battlefields, but in the quiet council chambers of those trying to outlast them. The cedars of Mount Lebanon weren't just trees to the Phoenicians, they were pillars of the cosmos, their roots tangled with the divine. Towering over the coastal cities, these ancient giants supplied the sacred timber that built everything from Solomon's temple to the mighty ships that plied the Mediterranean. But these forests were more than a resource, they were living cathedrals where the rustling of branches whispered the will of the gods. Temple inscriptions describe ceremonies where priests anointed the oldest cedars with oil and honey, marking them as the dwelling places of El and Baal. To fell one without ritual was to risk celestial wrath, a belief that proved chillingly prophetic when overharvesting triggered ecological collapse and the gods seemed to turn their backs. The scale of Phoenician cedar used borders on the unimaginable. A single warship required the wood of 400 mature trees, their resin-soaked trunks resisting rot for decades. The demand was so relentless that by the 8th century before the Common Era, the forests had retreated from the coast to the mountain's highest slopes. Archaeologists studying pollen deposits found a shocking pattern. sediment layers from Tyre's golden age contain almost no cedar pollen, proving the deforestation was near total. Yet the most haunting evidence comes from the Epic of Gilgamesh, a text the Phoenicians knew well. The story's cedar forest, guarded by the demon Humbaba, eerily mirrors real groves near Byblos where stumps still bear axe marks matching Phoenician tools. Was Humbaba a metaphor for ecological consequences their society couldn't yet name? Divine retribution took tangible form. Clay tablets from Ugarit describe a plague of locusts descending on Phoenician cities after a particularly reckless harvest, while later Roman historians noted landslides burying coastal villages, direct results of deforestation. The Phoenicians themselves seem to recognize the connection. A 6th century BCE stele from Sidon shows a weeping priestess offering sacrifices to a withered cedar, its branches barren. The inscription pleads with Astarte to restore the breath of the mountains. Even their shipbuilders adapted, switching to cypress and pine, though these woods lacked cedar's magical resistance to shipworms. Modern ecologists have quantified the disaster. Core samples from Lebanon's remaining cedars reveal a genetic bottleneck around 500 BC, the point when overlogging left too few trees to sustain healthy diversity. Yet the Phoenician response holds unexpected lessons. At the Temple of Eshmun, archaeologists found saplings planted in precise formations, their roots cradled in pottery shards to retain water. These weren't just practical reforestation efforts. Ritual texts call them the bones of the earth, suggesting they saw the act of planting as spiritual restitution. The grove's decline mirrors Phoenicia's own fading power, as if their fate was literally rooted in the trees they revered but failed to protect. Standing in Lebanon's last old growth stands today. You can almost hear the echo of axes and the whispered prayers that came too late. Among the dust-covered ruins of Tel Brak in modern-day Syria, archaeologists uncovered something unsettling: thousands of small, alabaster figurines with oversized, staring eyes. These eye idols, dating back to the 4th millennium before the Common Era, seem to peer across the centuries with an intensity that chills the blood. But what connects these Mesopotamian relics to the Phoenician traders who wouldn't dominate the region for another 2,000 years? The answer lies in the way these eerie objects traveled, not just through space but through time, evolving into a cultural obsession that would span empires. At first glance, the eye idols appear crude, simple stick figures with discs for heads and exaggerated circular eyes, yet their power was anything but primitive. Found clustered in temple precincts, they were likely offerings to a deity associated with sight, possibly the forerunner of the Phoenician god El, whose epithet, the bull, might reference these wide-eyed guardians. What's fascinating is how Phoenician artisans later adapted the motif. Excavations at Sidon revealed 8th century BC amulets with nearly identical enlarged eyes, but now crafted from lapis lazuli and mounted in gold. These weren't just copies, they were refinements blending Mesopotamian tradition with Phoenician artistry. The deeper significance emerges when you examine where these objects were placed. Tel Brak's idols were found near doorways and market stalls positions, suggesting a protective function against the evil eye, a belief still prevalent in the Levant today. Phoenician merchants, always attuned to local superstitions, seem to have adopted and commercialized the concept. Ship manifests from Tyre list cargoes of eye stones bound for Egypt and Greece, while a wreck off Malta yielded a crate of fist-sized ceramic eyes, their backs inscribed with Phoenician letters thought to be buyers' names. This wasn't just spiritual practice, it was spiritual entrepreneurship. Modern parallels hint at why the motif endured. Neuroscientists note that humans are hardwired to notice exaggerated eyes, a trait that would have made the idols psychologically potent. The Phoenicians may have grasped this intuitively, using the idol's gaze to command attention in crowded bazaars or aboard storm-tossed ships. A Carthaginian child's grave contained an eye idol tucked beside the skeleton's ribcage, its placement suggesting it was worn as a pendant, a personal guardian against unseen threats. But the most chilling discovery came from a temple archive in Ugarit. A cracked tablet describes a ritual where priests would open the eyes of newly carved idols by daubing them with a mixture of mercury and crushed malachite, a toxic paste that made the pupils gleam unnaturally in torchlight. The description matches residue found on Phoenician-era idols in Cyprus, proving the practice survived for millennia. Whether these staring figures were meant to watch over the living or watch for divine omens, their unblinking presence whispers of a shared terror across civilizations, the fear of being unseen by the gods. Language doesn't just fade, it's often erased. The slow death of Punic, the Phoenician dialect spoken across North Africa long after Rome crushed Carthage, wasn't an accident of history. It was a targeted silencing, a linguistic genocide masked as progress. By Augustine's era in the 4th century, Punic had retreated to the hinterlands, clinging to life in legal deeds and the sermons of rural priests. Yet scratch beneath Rome's triumphal narratives, and you'll find the scars of a deliberate campaign to extinguish not just a people, but their very words. The evidence hides in plain sight. Dig through the archives of Roman Carthage, and you'll discover a curious pattern. Punic contracts still dictated property transfers well into the 2nd century, their cramped script squeezed between lines of flawless Latin. These weren't relics of nostalgia, they were necessities. Local farmers and merchants, generations removed from Hannibal's war, still trusted only the old language for land disputes. Even Roman bureaucrats tolerated them, though not without sneers. One magistrate's marginal note complains about that guttural Carthaginian scribble delaying court proceedings. But by Augustine's time, these documents shrink to mere footnotes, their phrasing increasingly mangled by Latin loanwords. The death knell wasn't neglect, it was policy. Augustine himself, the North African bishop who shaped Western Christianity, drops the most telling clue. In his letters, he mentions Punic-speaking congregations needing interpreters, yet insists on preaching in Latin lest pagan echoes linger. The irony stings, a man who rose from Berber farmlands now aiding Rome's cultural purge. His contemporary, the grammarian Maximus of Madoros, was less subtle. Punic speech is the cough of a dying beast, he wrote, urging its replacement with civilized tongues. But the real smoking gun lies in the archaeology of sound. Linguists analyzing pronunciation shifts in late Punic inscriptions notice something sinister: deliberate distortions. Words for sacred concepts like Baal or Tanit were misspelled with exaggerated vowels, as if scribes were mocking their own heritage. A 3rd century curse tablet from Leptis Magna shows the ultimate humiliation. Punic phrases written in Greek letters, a forced marriage of alphabets that gutted the language's soul. This wasn't organic evolution, it was linguistic sabotage, yet in the mountains of Tunisia, resistance flickered. Graffiti in remote shrines mixes Punic prayers with Berber symbols, a clandestine fusion Rome couldn't stamp out. The last gasp comes from an unexpected source: Jewish tombstones near Constantine, dated to the 5th century. Their inscriptions blend Hebrew and Punic, a final act of defiance from communities who remembered Carthage's ghost. Language, it seems, can be buried but not killed. The real mystery isn't why Punic died, it's how fragments still whisper under the weight of empires. Buried beneath the waves off the coast of Sicily, a Phoenician warship's hull tells a silent horror story, its once mighty cedar planks reduced to a honeycomb of jagged tunnels crumbling at the touch. This wasn't the work of enemy fire or stormy seas, but an enemy far smaller and more relentless: the teredo worm, a ravenous mollusk that gnawed through the very foundation of Phoenician naval dominance. These thumbnail-sized creatures, sometimes called shipworms, turned the Mediterranean's salty depths into an all-you-can-eat buffet, their larvae boring into wood with calcium-hardened shells that acted like nature's drill bits. Within months, a ship's hull could resemble Swiss cheese, its structural integrity doomed long before the crew noticed the damage. The Phoenicians' reliance on cedar, The same rot-resistant wood that made their ships legendary became their fatal flaw. Unlike oak or pine, cedar's natural oils initially repelled marine organisms, giving their vessels a temporary advantage, but teredo worms adapted. By the 5th century before the Common Era, Mediterranean shipyards reported infestations so severe, some ships disintegrated mid-voyage. A salvage operation near Tyre uncovered a merchant galley whose keel had snapped cleanly in half, the telltale grooves of teredo burrows visible even after 2 millennia underwater. The crew's final cargo, precious Cypriot copper ingots, still lay scattered across the seabed, a testament to how quickly nature could undo human ambition. Rome's rise exploited this weakness with brutal efficiency. While Phoenician shipwrights scrambled to reinforce hulls with pitch and tar, Roman engineers took a radically different approach, sheathing their warships in lead. Archaeologists examining a 1st century BCE Roman trireme near Naples found thin sheets of lead nailed over oak planks, creating a barrier no worm could penetrate. The innovation came at a cost. Lead was heavy, reducing speed, but it offered something priceless: longevity. Where a Phoenician ship might last 10 years before becoming worm food, Roman vessels patrolled the seas for decades. The economic ripple effects were catastrophic. Phoenician city-states, already strained by Roman blockades, now faced skyrocketing maintenance costs. A ledger from Carthage's final years lists expenses for replacing entire fleets every 3 years, a financial hemorrhage Rome avoided. Even more damning, sediment cores from ancient shipyards show a stark divergence. Roman ports accumulated layers of lead slag from hull repairs, while Phoenician sites yielded mountains of sawdust and cedar fragments, evidence of their losing battle against biology. Yet the cruelest twist wasn't technological but ecological. Teredo worms thrived in warmer waters, and climate data reveals the Mediterranean experienced a sharp temperature rise during Rome's ascendancy. The very seas that nurtured Phoenician trade now bred their destroyers in unprecedented numbers. By the time Carthage fell in 146 BC, its once proud navy was a shadow fleet, its ships so riddled with worms that Roman historians mocked them as floating sieves. Modern marine biologists confirm the scale of the disaster. Lab experiments show teredo larvae consume cedar 30% faster than oak, a quirk of the wood's softer cellular structure. The Phoenicians' sacred trees, it turns out, were the perfect meal. Standing in the ruins of Carthage's dry docks today, you can almost hear the ghosts of shipwrights cursing the tides, not realizing their greatest enemy wasn't Rome's legions, but creatures so small they could hide in a drop of water. Deep in the genetic blueprint of modern Mediterranean populations, an ancient maritime saga lingers, one written not in clay or stone, but in the spiraling code of DNA. Recent studies comparing genomes from Lebanon to Portugal reveal a startling pattern. Distinct markers tracing back to Phoenician traders are still scattered across coastal communities like biological breadcrumbs. These aren't just vague ancestral whispers. Specific sequences on the Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA act as molecular time capsules, revealing how these seafaring pioneers left more than amphorae in their wake. They left descendants. A landmark study published in 2019 analyzed over 2,000 individuals from former Phoenician outposts, uncovering a shared genetic signature among men in Malta, Sardinia, and southern Spain that directly links them to ancient burial sites near Tyre and Sidon. The distribution of these markers mirrors trading routes with eerie precision. In Tunisia, where Carthage once stood, nearly 1 in 5 males carry a Y chromosome haplogroup labeled J2, a variant rare in North Africa but common in Lebanon, suggesting paternal lineages preserved across millennia. Even more telling are the maternal lines. Mitochondrial DNA from bones excavated at Phoenician colonies in Ibiza matches living populations in coastal Lebanon, proving women weren't just passengers on these voyages, they were settlers shaping new communities. One particular genetic twist, a mutation causing hereditary hemochromatosis, a condition that alters iron absorption, appears at higher rates in these regions. Historically, this might have offered survival advantages to populations shifting to iron-rich diets through maritime trade, but the real surprise lies in the gaps. Despite Phoenicia's reach into places like Morocco and Sicily, genetic traces there are fainter, often diluted by later Roman and Arab migrations. This wasn't random, it reflects deliberate colonial strategies. Isotope analysis of teeth from Phoenician burial sites in Spain shows most settlers came from a single Levantine gene pool, while North African colonies absorbed more local Berber ancestry. The Phoenicians, it seems, adjusted their social DNA as deftly as their trade networks, assimilating where convenient, maintaining genetic cohesion where profitable. Modern Lebanese families with surnames linked to ancient port cities still carry these maritime markers at double the national average, as if their ancestors' nautical prowess was encoded right into their cells. The most poetic discovery emerged from a fishing village near Cadiz, where researchers sampled residents whose families had lived there since Roman times. Their DNA held not just Levantine links, but a rare allele tied to sea salt tolerance, a genetic adaptation common among Eastern Mediterranean populations. Here, millennia after Phoenician ships first anchored off Iberia, the ocean still courses through their veins. These lingering strands of ancestry do more than rewrite family trees. They collapse the artificial divide between ancient and modern, proving history isn't just something we study. It's something we carry inside us, as unchanging as the tides they once sailed. From the whispering cedars of Lebanon to the storm-lashed coasts of Sardinia, the Phoenicians didn't just connect ancient civilizations, they became the invisible threads weaving them together. These 25 mysteries reveal a people who mastered the art of being indispensable without demanding the spotlight, shaping the world from the shadows. Their alphabet didn't just spread, it mutated, adapting to Greek temples, Roman law courts, and eventually the screen you're reading this on. Their trading networks weren't mere routes but living systems, pulsing with goods, ideas, and even genetic legacies that still surface in Mediterranean DNA today. Think about it, every time you write a grocery list or check a price tag, you're tapping into a system they refined for merchants tallying cedar logs and Tyrian purple. What's astonishing isn't just their innovations, but how they hid them in plain sight. The caduceus symbol on ambulances, the electrum coins in museum cases, even the debate over transatlantic contact all whisper of a civilization that preferred subtlety over statues. They built harbors that defied physics and dyes that outlasted empires, yet left no boastful monuments, their greatest trick, making their influence so seamless that we forgot to credit them. Rome copied their ships, Greece borrowed their letters, and Carthage's fall was less a defeat than a disappearing act, with Phoenician culture dissolving into the cultures it helped birth. So which mystery lingers in your mind? The drowned streets of Tyre, where fish dart through windows that once framed merchants haggling over murex shells. The eerie eye idols that watched over ports from Syria to Sicily. Or perhaps Hannibal's phantom fleet, its camouflaged hulls a metaphor for a people who thrived by staying just out of focus. Whatever captures your imagination, remember this: the Phoenicians remind us that history isn't always written by the loudest voices. Sometimes it's etched in shipworms' trails, hidden under lead tablets, or coiled like a serpent around a healer's staff, waiting for us to look closer. The real mystery isn't what they left behind, but how much of our world still carries their invisible signature.